Hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here, and you may have seen me in various arenas of health and wellness. That seems to be where I gravitate, and you may recognize me from the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. And I'm very pleased today to have another guest on our Becoming an Herbalist series, Jennifer Ann Tucker. And I've been pleased to get to know her through the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, where she's shared with us popping in on classes sometimes because Matt's like, hey, it's my friend Jennifer, and specifically coming in at times to teach us about poultices and other wisdom that she's learned along the way. And so I'm very pleased to have her with us today. She's also an artist, and so we'll get into that as well. So thanks for joining, Jennifer.
Thank you, Tara. This is wonderful work that you're doing for our communities.
Well, I appreciate it. And like I was telling you before we got started, the purpose of the How to Become an Herbalist or Becoming an Herbalist series is for those who they know already that they're into herbalism, right? And maybe they're considering going beyond, and I put in air quotes here, just serving their family and friends, because the air quotes are because just is not to say that I think that's a significant role in and of itself. If you are just doing that, you are playing a very significant role within your community and your family. But if you happen to feel the calling to go beyond and into your greater community, hopefully this will help to either inspire and or help to see the various paths there are into herbalism. And what I found fascinating, you said that being an herbalist was the farthest thing from what you thought you would be doing with your life.
Yes.
What did you think you were going to do with your life?
My mother was an artist in many ways, and so that was where I felt most comfortable in my life, and that I would pursue that. But I also wanted a career, and at my age group, most careers for women were secretarial or into possibly nursing, things like that. So I did sort of investigate that. My paternal grandmother was a pediatric nurse, and she was a single mother for much of her life, so she had to do work. And so that was a good model for me, as well as the artistic side of my mother. So my education regarding formal education was all through first 2 years in art school, Minneapolis School of Art and Design.
Mm.
And then I discovered photography through a good friend. One time I was home for summer visiting my mother in North Dakota, and there was a friend of my brother's who had just opened up a photography studio, handed me a camera, loaded it up, and said, just go out and explore. And I did. And so that shifted my view from painting, which I was pursuing, and graphic design. Photography just somehow made sense to me when I looked through this little box and onto this mirrored image, and it helped the world become more like a window. And that, I don't know, there was just something about that magic, and then it being in the dark room and watching an image come out, and you're always working with light. So painting was in a studio, and I wasn't a studio type girl. So that is my formal education that I expected to continue, either going into being an educator of art form at a university level, because that's where I got my degrees. So, but that didn't happen.
Well, I didn't know that you went to Minneapolis for that. That's my neck of the woods, and you're all the way in Pennsylvania.
Well, that's because the husband came out this way, or the partner. Otherwise, I was born in North Dakota, and the next big city was Minneapolis. And I didn't want to go to a junior college in North Dakota. I had, bigger ambitions that way. So it was the Minneapolis School of Art and Design, which was a good, excellent foundation for beginning my path.
Now, sorry to interrupt. I think we have just a slight delay. You have a couple examples of your artwork and your background there.
This is very much more recent. So that's by recent, I mean this had to do with many years with my partner, Jerry, my husband, Gerald Lang, and he started the digital photography studio. But before that, before digital, we forget, once digital came into the world, we forget how images were made. So these are a joyful combination of my herbalism life because they're the botanicals that I've used, and that are growing on my farm. So it's like you've just leaped into my future, my now future from where I was.
Just as you said, you just leaped. My cat leaped onto the desk in the background to get into a. Come on, Joanne. She really needs a nap, but she's too riled up to nap. Just like a kid, it's so funny how even a little animal can be just like a kid. Like she's just too riled up to settle down.
Right. She feels our energy. Yes, I understand that.
Yes. So you and your husband actually have a book of these beautiful photographs as well, correct?
Yeah, and we just had a retrospective exhibit this last year, which actually covered both of our careers as image makers. And the
Wow.
botanicals were a huge part of that. And these are, uh, just to give you a sense of the size, 24 by 24. Yeah. And
Wow.
we printed them ourselves. And that was the whole point. Jerry started the digital photography studio at Penn State, which was one of the first places in the country. I think it was only the second college that was offering to their students uh, digital technology for camera and art. And they didn't know which direction actually photography was going to go. So, without getting too far into that, he brought home a lot of equipment, and this scanner bed, which is a flatbed scanner. I don't know. I just started laying some plants on there that were volunteering, you know, and the imagery that was so present. I really felt the aliveness of the plant coming through and the energy as well, and the collaboration with the plant because it did volunteer. And so that really brought my herbalism part of myself a great joy to be able to have these images be so powerfully present. And so that's been going on now since when I'm not good with my dates, but whenever digital came in, we'd have to go back into the annuals and look at it. But that made things that sometimes we tend to put our careers in little categories or boxes, or we wear that particular hat and then we're somebody else for something else. I have to say that this was so beautiful to have it all come together, both with a life partner whose work we've been side by side doing, but independently, and then to have something collaborate in this way. Not only collaboration with another person, but collaboration with the plants in a way that had already been a collaboration through healing work, through making potions, making things for people, and hearing their stories. So, um, yeah, it's expansive.
What I like, we were talking, of course, before this got started, and I was mentioning how this work with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism really came together, and it wasn't something that I could really plan. And it sounds like this very much was very similar. Your herbalism practice as well as the botanical photography. And again, I hope it's helpful to reemphasize that's the purpose of this Becoming an Herbalist series, because I think especially these days we can get so caught in our minds and, this is the next step I need to take. And if I want this, I have to take this path. And you're talking about, it seems like you a true artistic inspiration, right? Or or curiosity, where you
Mhm.
had this flatbed scanner and, like you said, herbs that volunteered themselves, and you just tried something out, and then it became what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And so just like your path to create the institute as you have, I think, yeah, that's maybe that's how life happens. And but sometimes like the intention, like choosing something like a career, then you have a formal way to present yourself to the world. But if we go back to the initial subject of this interview, that was never my plan to be an herbalist.
So let's get into that a bit. What has been your history as maybe milestones as a quote herbalist?
Hmm. Well, since I didn't plan on it, it came by accident in many ways. And I think you'll see how accidents work in my life, um, in sometimes positive ways. So um, I think one of the interesting things that I'd like to share is I did have an intention to become an nursing and go into a nursing career. So there must have been something in me that wanted to follow a kind of intentional path for healing. Um, and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was a nurse, so she had a good was it a good example for me of that. Um, but when I tried to volunteer in high school as a candidate to start preparing myself for that particular career, I found that every time I went in the hospital as a volunteer, I became physically ill. I would feel nauseous and my body would shake. So it just didn't make sense. And there wasn't really anyone that I could tell that to. So I just kind of dropped away from it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll be a veterinarian because I was just really more comfortable with animals than I was with people. So, and I could always figure out an animal and I'd pick up these little wild things that were maybe injured, whatever, and try to bring them home and heal them or learn how to feed them. So I did have an affinity for the nonverbal world,
Mm.
relatives, and I knew that. And so I think there were early signs there. I'd like to think that that sensitivity, then I poured more into the art field. But again, when I met Jerry, which was at the University of Minnesota when I had switched over there to focus more on photography, um, I went to he he had gotten a job out here and you know proposed to me, but was not interested in getting married. So um, I had a little rebel part of me that didn't want to get tied down. And but I was willing to come out and try the relationship because I did honor the relationship in a way that I felt it was a good relationship and I wanted to honor going forward with it. So we moved in together. He started his job at Penn State. The summer before, while I was deciding, I had went to Mexico with a girlfriend and she had gotten a very bad case of amoebic dysentery that brought us back home very quickly.
Mhm.
So I think I was set up in a way to get physically ill, both the kind of nervousness to go against my family to make that decision to move in with someone, um, to drop my education, and to just try something that I felt I was needing to follow. So I became ill when we came to Pennsylvania. I couldn't keep food in my digestive system at all. I did go to the doctor and he said, well, I think we'll have to do exploratory surgery.
Wow.
So it was like, wow, okay, I think I'll just go home and die then because I'm not going to make that choice. I don't know if it was that dramatic, but I did try a few things. The other thing that you have to realize is when we moved here, the I had not yet met too many people, but there was a connection somehow that must have started at the what was called the Free University, where we students were kind of rebelling against the institution and wanted classes that were free by people in the community that had talents and talents that we wouldn't be getting through the curriculum. So it was like that's where Evelyn came to give her talk. Evelyn Snook, who became my mentor, Bill Russell, who was a physicist and a specialist in mushroom identification. So when I became ill and I had no choices, that's when I reached out to Bill Russell and asked if there was any way. So yes, there was the first step on the path because his recommendation was calamus root and caraway seed tea. So he said, just choose some calamus root. And I go, what's that? Where do I get it? So that those plants were two significant things that made such a difference and have continued to make a huge difference in my life. So calamus especially.
How did it relieve your body? Or was it more than your body, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, it probably was when I look back because I didn't know any of these other psycho emotional components at all. And I think whatever his intuitive suggestion was, it was that no food was staying in my body. And, there was just constant diarrhea, so you can't live too long with that. So that was not a diagnosis. It was more just, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't, he didn't do much other than to say calamus and drink some caraway seed tea. So I just did that once I got the plants, but then the plants start to teach because that's the beauty I've learned of how this really unfolds. You have a teacher guides, it introduces some of the ways that they use plants, become your ways of using plants. But then there's also, yeah, this this having to ingest the plant. It becomes part of us in some way, and then the teaching starts in such subtle ways that sometimes we don't know we're being taught. I think. I mean, that's how it kind of happened for me. There's just things that start to wake up and remember maybe how we're really meant to be in health or relationship.
What happened after the caraway seeds and the calamus root? How did things progress from there?
I think I must have gotten stronger. It must have started to influence the system, so that I felt a little confidence that this would work. And then I sought out those people and went to those talks there because they were a part of the Free University then, and they were leading foraging walks. And that it was just such a wonderful time. And like I said, I grew up in North Dakota, so Pennsylvania was not a place I expected to stay very long because it was too green. There were too many trees. The roads are all curvy. There's these funny mountains that aren't really mountains, but they are really old mountains, I've come to learn. So everything to me was just kind of green and too much green. And I didn't know the names of anything until I started walking with the teachers when they were foraging, and then there would be names attached to things that we were eating. And I go, oh, do I have to learn botany? but it didn't occur to me that I had to learn botany. That didn't seem like a path of interest to me because it was more a foreign language, and I didn't feel confident in foreign languages, having tried to take them in school and not being good at it. So it's kind of how one deletes certain things and tries to find a path. I did anyway, tried to find a path that felt more comfortable and that kept me excited. And like you pointed out, the word curious and enlivened by the curiosity that's really about creativity.
I imagine being an artist, there's a certain aspect of having your hands in things, right? And being in the
Hmm.
moment and being open to receiving and just following things through a process, or not even a process, but their own process, right? And I can see those similarities in herbalism where you have to wait for a season. There has to be a spark of all of a sudden your agenda clears up and it's the perfect time to collect a certain plant or so many things.
So true, Tara. And that is really very much like art, like you pointed out, because to me, now that I've foraged for many years with plants or gone out to find the medicinal plants that are calling to me, it's not any different than going out seeking images or seeing an image that you really feel, I need to capture that image, that moment somehow, or setting up a whole situation in which something might happen by accident that then leads me in another direction. So that brings me to a little bit of how working with Evelyn, there's two ways that my life intersected with Evelyn. Um, One is because I had an ancestor who had a diagnosis of cancer. And so he committed suicide when he got that diagnosis. And that impacted me as a 10-year-old, very much so. So to me, cancer was a death sentence. And when I heard Evelyn's story of her life and how she had overcome it, and in a natural way, my life, hearing her story in that moment turned 350 degrees. And I thought, this is what life is meant to be like, a kinder, more natural way to understand illness. And so for me, her story was my healing of my ancestor in some ways. And pursuing the kinds of time spent with her also came through a friend who did have a diagnosis of cancer, but she did not want to choose a normal medical path. So every Wednesday I would take her over to Evelyn, and we would just have a wonderful day walking or preparing medicines. You're right, all the hands-on things, but also all of the ways in which we don't focus on the illness. So Sharon wasn't focusing on her illness. And that was a big teaching right there on how to work with people who are devastated by an illness diagnosis or, even a tragedy or an accident, anything that creates a trauma. The healing should have a way to lead a person out of that.
How did she do that?
We would be making poultices or we'd be making foot baths, and then we go for a walk. Um, we'd be making all the plants. So Sharon and I were just like being students of Evelyn, but with the focus of whatever was in season, whatever was coming up. Maybe one time we'd go pick persimmons, and she'd tell us the story of Yule Gibbons and how much fun it was making food for Yule with Yule Gibbons and doing all kinds of food experiments that she enjoyed creating recipes with him. And then I would get his books, and then we'd read his books, and then we'd talk some more about Evelyn's time with him. So, and then we go walk through really special, beautiful places because Evelyn's own healing came through places like the Tall Timbers, um, which was some virgin hemlock area um, here in Pennsylvania, where her husband, when she was so ill, um, and the doctor that helped her overcome her body's illness, they would take her, they wanted to go fishing, and they would take her and put her on a blanket by the stream where they were fishing. And she said those times in nature were what always brought her back, so that to the point where she felt it would be possible to live out her life and overcome what was challenging her body. So her story is, you know, amazing to me. And I followed her mentorship throughout, including what she does for bowel cleaning. Um, but when I said I became an herbalist by accident, it was like I had horses and, you know, I was getting bumped around sometimes.
Mm.
So the poultice making was really fun because the first miracle seemed when I fell down the stairs at home. I thought, oh, Evelyn would put a comfrey poultice on this, so I'm going to put a comfrey poultice on my bruised hip. I expected to find, like we do, a bruise, a bad bruise. But there it was, wherever I had put the comfrey poultice on, there was no bruise. And there never was a bruise,
Wow.
except where the poultice wasn't. Then there was two little purple stripes. And I thought, oh, this is a miracle. I can't imagine that all you have to do is mash up a plant, slap it on your body like a little kid messing around in the kitchen, like we all did, messing up our mother's kitchens. And there it was. It worked. So I was definitely hooked. But I still didn't consider myself an herbalist. I wanted to learn it to keep myself healthy. So, like you mentioned, you know, it's a good place to start keeping yourself healthy with the plants because then you're going to know them more intimately and you're going to have more confidence in sharing that authentic knowledge out to others, even if their story's a little different than yours. Um, and so, yeah, I had a lot of naive years of working with plants, but I think it was because, you know, comfrey was introduced to me by Evelyn. And I think Comfrey just decided it was going to take my naivete and make sure everything sort of came out all right every time because there were some things that I know I wouldn't teach now, how people would use it. And it got me out of trouble every time. Pretty amazing.
There's a saying in the herbal community, a phrase that you have an herbal ally. You have certain herbs that are your buddies. Would you call comfrey one of yours?
I think it was definitely Evelyn's. And then because I was following Evelyn, it just said, well, I guess I'll help this person out too. Yeah, I know. I've heard the herbal allies. I do like how we can think that way. Um, but I don't know. I feel like they're partners in a way that they want to learn too through our experiences. And so by us using them in ways that's creative as well as maybe new, you know, it's almost like if we become professionals, then we lock ourselves in. The same thing can be said for herbs. If we decide that the way that they've always been used is the only way they can be used, then that's kind of what I'm saying is that I discovered some things where they will be willing to help where maybe that wasn't their area of specialty, if you will. And that was new to me, to wake up to a sense of that kind of partnership. And so I've learned to kind of trust that part while I'm also learning all of the really important traditions and common sense and real, following the practices of what the proper approach is with the plants and so forth and what they're used for. I'm not throwing that out the window, but I'm saying that I've had too many experiences where a plant seems to step forward willingly to learn something that isn't necessarily written about.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that comes to mind? A memory story?
Well, there's one which is interesting because I later found a writing about it, which then confirmed that I could trust learning in this way. And that was, I had a frozen shoulder, and the physical therapist at the time, his older system was to kind of try to force the shoulder loose. And that wasn't really working for me at all. At the same time, um, I think I was learning about pleurisy root, and this also ties in Matthew a little bit. And there was pleurisy root, or butterfly weed, Asclepias, growing on our land, wild. And I decided I was going to learn how to dig it. So I approached a plant that volunteered. I started digging it. We have clay soil. Um, and it took me about 2 days to dig the complete root out. And what I learned from digging that root out was, when that root encountered a rock, it did not go around the rock. It did not adapt itself around the rock. It made the rock move, evidently, because these roots were quite straight. But I was also digging a lot of rocks out from around it to get a complete root out. So I went to this appointment, um, and I decided to chew on the raw pleurisy root because I like to learn about the plants in some ways if I know they're not poisonous to do that with. So I was chewing on it, and the shoulder started to release in the appointment. And I went, interesting. So I do think I talked to Matthew about that, and we decided that that had um, influenced the synovial fluid within the joint, possibly. Who knows what else magically. Um, because the root that I dug was a straight down root with one angle out. So it was almost like, yeah, half a T. So it wasn't until much later that I learned that I think, and I wish I knew the source, but that there had been a use of chewing on it raw. So then I thought, oh, I wouldn't have known that at the time.
You were also digging. I mean, were you digging with one arm, or how did you manage to do that?
That might have been at a separate time, and I used the root because what I'll do sometimes is, when I do dig a fresh root, I'll keep it in the refrigerator, sort of like we do carrots, as a way to continue to use it or make medicine out of it. And I'm afraid the memory of time mixes some things up because it's not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Still amazing, regardless. There are so many messages and or signatures, right? The signs and plants and what they can be helpful for, and being just willing to try, like your experiment with the flowers on, or the plants on the flatbed scanner. Just
Mm-hmm.
being open to that thought, that where does that come from? I'm going to give that a try.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Instant inspiration somehow. And then I remember another one, and that was the flower essences. Um, because it was really the flower essences that got me into being an herbalist, or calling myself an herbalist, or beginning to see people as a quote herbalist. But I remember being over at a friend's house, and the wild evening primrose was in bloom, and it was like, this is so beautiful, and I've learned how to make flower essences. I'm going to make a flower essence out of evening primrose and give it to all my women friends, um, and see what happens. So that's what we did, and we found that our periods, I don't know, one friend said, "Oh my God, this made such a difference in my period." And I went, "How?" And that's when I also then put together that flower essences will affect the physical body as well. And we don't often think of flower essences doing that, because a lot of the work is referencing more emotional or mental or energetic states, which of course do influence the physical body. So again, there was another teaching just by the plant, you know, entering into a way in which we accidentally just did something together. And yeah.
That was my next question, was what was the shift? What brought you into, quote, being the herbalist? So the flower essences, but what what was the chain of events? Did that experiment with the women start them asking questions and referring people, or what happened?
Well, we got to back up a little bit, because the flower essences, Evelyn invited Ellen Everett Hopman um, to teach with her, and I was always helping with all of Evelyn's workshops um, over in Lewistown, and so I was there, and Evelyn said, "Will you take Ellen out and show her the path where we're going to be taking the students, so she can prepare for teaching us about flower essences?" And I thought, "Oh, great." So I took her, and I had Ellen all to myself for that time, and yeah, so I learned also in the class that she taught, but also just from being with her, about flower essences. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because, I'd learned how to make tinctures, I'd been putting poultices on my body, you know, the heavier ways of making physical medicine. But this was like, wow, this I can hand out to people and know it's safe, in terms of that idea that you're willing to share things, that when that starts, because of how much amazing experiences I myself had had, of course we want to share those with others when they need it or want it. So I felt like I could really safely do that, because again, remember, I'm identifying myself as an artist, and somehow I still put herbalism that Evelyn was doing into a field of real um, training, and possibly I still had all that medical concern idea that you would have to be something else. I don't know. So anyway, that's how it came together for me, was the flower essences, and I started making my own flower essences. And then of course, Matthew's book, Seven Herbs Plants as Teachers, um, a very important early book for me to learn from. So yeah, I think it was seeing people, and it also happened by the fact that I was doing a lot of workshops with Evelyn. So people then associated me with learning. And if they couldn't get a hold of her, they would call me. And then gradually that segued, but it didn't segue until I had also done a lot of work on myself and my own horses.
Mm.
Um, and that would be through a lot of traumatic kind of accidents that happened, yeah, to animals, big animals and stuff, injuries, and seeing how much this really did work. And
Mhm.
so it gave a kind of fearless confidence that I would question now with a lot more experience, that yeah, I just completely trusted, and it always worked pretty much.
Was it trust because you had seen things work for Evelyn, or was it kind of a naive trust?
It was all of that. It was because I'd seen him work for Evelyn. I'd heard her stories. The stories had power for me. Um, and also then because of the power of her stories, I would try it for myself or for my horses, and then I would get these amazing results.
Mhm.
And so it's through actual hands-on experience that then when you're called to do something and you are the person there and the plants are there, then you can't refuse. And that becomes also then another learning, amazing experience that then later you might call it case history. But at the
Mhm.
moment, you weren't intending it to be that. So people would come, and gradually I learned what my gift was more about listening to their story. And because of my art, my artist side, I would listen to a story that they were telling, and I could tell in some ways like a picture where there wasn't some, it's even hard to put words to, but not where it needs fixing, but where there needed to be something, a way for them to find a way through this, out of this, how to be creative with it. I really believe healing needs to excite something about our inner creativity.
Mhm. As the
And
as the practitioner, will you say?
and as the person, yes, because we're part of what I've noticed, maybe my job is, or how I've assigned this to myself, is to bring forth in that other person their own creativity to maybe trust or be curious. And so my sessions now are, well, they come to the farm. It's about, it can be anywhere up to 2 hours, and I tell the people that, it could be long because it could include flower essences. It could include a custom made tea for what it is they're seeking rebalancing with. It could additionally have a tincture. Each of these things has to be, I make in front of them, as well as teach them how to go home and use them. And of course, I'm always available for questions, but I found that that just naturally became my way. And it's probably from Evelyn, because she would just bring people into her kitchen, and we'd make the poultice in the blender and apply it, or compresses, or the teas, and also give somebody, sit them down, give them a cup of tea. They're usually upset. In the case, like the type of herbalist person she was, is people came to her when they were often in crisis. So if I were there, it'd be, Jenny, go out to the garden and get this or that or the other. And then I'd just be kind of participating with her as she would prepare these things. And I'd watch how the person would begin to calm down, or begin to relax, or get so involved in what she was doing that they forgot some of what was happening to them. And I think, you know, that is part of the magic of what we do,
Mhm.
as well as making these potions out of things that are growing in our yard. Or that was the other thing that was so magical, is foraging with Bill and Keith Wilson and Evelyn, is just, really, we can eat these things that are just growing out here. I mean, I grew up eating out of, my mother cooking after the war. A lot of food in North Dakota was, out of cans or frozen, or my dad hunted. But no foraging, never heard of anything like that. I might find a four-leaf clover on the lawn and nibble on it, but that was it. Now I can eat hollyhocks and Rose of Sharon and all kinds of things that were not part of my diet repertoire.
Walks are so much fun. I've found since learning about the plants and foraging, going on a walk is so much more interesting.
Yes, yeah. Right.
I
Yeah.
I like your kind of painting the scenario, painting, right? Setting the
Mhm.
stage of what it's like for someone on their visit. And I think this it can help as someone might be imagining how they might construct a practice or bring us into their life more. And I think that we intuitively yearn for this. You know, people will say, "I went to my doctor and they only spent 15 minutes with me." And I'm not bashing doctors. You know, that's all
Mm.
different model and so forth. But I think what that expresses is a yearning and a knowing that we need time. We need to be listened to. And the image that came to my mind, bringing it back to art as well, is you mentioned that you're listening, and it's not that something is missing in them, but it sounded like kind of putting the pieces together. And to me, it's like when making maybe a Thai-inspired dish, which to me are very complex in a way, because you have to have the right
Mhm.
ratios and ingredients. And I made a Thai soup a couple weeks ago that I've made many times, but I forgot to put the coconut milk in. And it made all the difference, right? And
Right.
so when you're talking about listening to the person, I imagine it's like that. It's you know, there's we use the word missing, but there's more like something that needs to be there to help connect the other things.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And that comes from, well, a little bit of the early time with the self-learning for myself, wanting to use the herbs for my own health. I would sit down and maybe a friend had called and said they were struggling with something. I was not yet feeling like I was going to tell them, but what I would do is take on what their struggle or their diagnosis or their challenge was. And then I'd be starting to look it up in every herb book that I had. And then there weren't that many herb books back then. But I would sit down, I would prepare a tea, and I would start researching. So it also requires this kind of desire to read the experiences of others. And that's why these teachers and like the institute that you have, a way to actually continue. I mean, I just continually want to learn. And I want to learn from others, and I want to learn how other herbalists and even other people healers are learning their skills, but also I need to continue to do what I do, and that's that's one definite way. Is like, you know, the way your institute is working is so valued, and since COVID got us all back on our Zoom classrooms, wow, it can be anywhere in the world because I don't do that much traveling now, and I can learn from herbalists that I wouldn't be able to get to go see, or be in their presence. Um, because that was one of the joys also early on when we started to find community gatherings like Green Nations gathering and things like that. Then, oh my gosh, the learning just got, bumped, bumped, bumped. Yeah, meeting all these people we didn't even know existed that were
That's one
also on the path. Yeah.
that's one of the commonalities I've heard among the interviews I've been doing with herbalists is how do you become an herbalist or how do you get known in your area as an herbalist? Because that's as if you're looking at doing it as a business, you obviously need clients. And so you're talking about learning and connection. And it's most often they've all said it's through classes or I volunteered for this event or but most often they're teaching classes,
Hmm.
which it sounds like how you came into it as well.
Yes, because Evelyn, she taught around the state, and I would just go with her. Um, Mostly at first, I was going because I wanted to continue learning from her, but then gradually it got to be where, as I got to know more and more of what it was that how she had healed herself, I would tell her, maybe you'd like to teach this this weekend or whatever. And then we started to kind of collaborate. And then she would tap on me when she needed a little break in her teaching moment. She'd say, and Jennifer will talk about her experience with flower essences. And then I'd freeze up because I never liked being called on to speak. And then I would just suddenly be talking away. Then later she would compliment me. So she was always a very encouraging type teacher in that way, mentor. I call her my herbal mother. Um, so it was through her teaching a lot of workshops that I got to meet a lot of people who then, because in those times, people really wanted to learn that sort of real hands-on way and would, you know, just take it. They weren't wanting to be herbalists. They really wanted to be how you had started out talking about. They wanted it for their family, they wanted it for themselves, and then it branches out from there. And I think that is the traditional way, you know, our kind of herbalism, if you will. So it just seems to naturally ripple out with experience. And the more experience you can gain, then the more you will want to gain more experience too. And that comes with everything we do that we focus on. So,
So you've been in the herbalism community for a long time, and it's almost it seems like there's this point where you called yourself an herbalist, but how many years since it did start more or less with Evelyn, how many years have you been practicing herbalism for yourself or with others?
well, that 360-degree moment happened what? I think in 1969 or 1970, when, because Jerry and I moved out here in 1969. He started the fall semester, and I immediately jumped into these different community things, but I didn't start as a student at the school, at the college. I think that was delayed a year. So I'm not real sure of my own timeline, but it's right in that time that I started. When I discovered Evelyn, Bill, and Keith, that was my outside of the academic learning
Mm-hmm.
time. And I valued that highly. And so I made a lot of time for that in my life. Whenever they were doing walks, I would be sure to be there.
So
So I guess it really started then because you're eating it, you're putting it on your body,
yeah.
you're walking in the woods, you're doing it. And
Well, I'm really curious about, in that amount of time, there are things about herbalism that doesn't change, but there are things that really do change. What is it that you've seen that has definitely changed since you first started in the field?
ah, well, I think what is amazing to me is the depth of self-education the herbalists I've listened to through your institute, as well as other, you know, modalities where I'm learning from them, and that is including a lot more of and when I say the sciences, it's the natural sciences. The understanding of the body, the vocabulary is changing in ways that I'm almost uncomfortable using.
Mm.
And so I don't. I still have to stay within my area of comfort for communication. Um, so I've seen and I'm just really proud of how all of that aspect of the community is working in a sense of broadening a way to educate that we didn't really have. We had Back to Eden. Which is a good book, but there were no books yet to learn from at that time, other than the ones that had come out of the earlier years, 1930s and so forth. So, um, yeah. So I think it's that. I think it's that aspect of how much broader and in more depth the education can be. I mean, because some of them are really botanists as well. They've
Mhm.
learned that component. There's something else that kind of came back, but I don't remember. Yeah. So
I have a few
that's,
follow-up questions that might spark some of those ideas as well.
yeah.
I'm sure over the many years of teaching and working with people, you've seen and heard many misconceptions about herbalism. What are some common misconceptions you've seen and heard people have about herbalism?
Well, I don't know about what you triggered right now is how I'm unlearning everybody because now the clients who come have been online looking up all these herbs and
Mhm.
they're telling me what they kind of think they should be having. And I'm going, interesting. Where did you learn that? You know, how do you feel that's going to address what it is that you're here, you know, to work with me? So I feel like this internet thing is, you know, it's just giving the surface and it's giving people an idea that they know it when they don't know it. It's information, and information can be tricky,
Yeah.
I think. It's not authentic. It's not coming from somewhere that's authentically experienced or known. Um, so I feel that's where I'm finding the clientele changing. And in teaching, um, because there was for I think it was about 5 years in a row I taught at um, Annie Michelle's massage school. It was a wonderful herbal program where we'd meet once a month, and I included, you know, taking walks and preparation, and because it was through the institute that was certifying massage therapists as well, I had access to physi- um, physiological teachers. So I had included physiology, which is not my area of expertise, not being trained in medical physiology or anything. So that was wonderful because it could also be designed exactly for my herbal class so that the themes of the herbs that month. And then we'd have lunch together, and that would be including preparing things. So I love having that kind of way to teach people.
Mhm.
And then she also would invite me to teach the flower essences to her massage therapist people. So they had another way to segue in without, um, as just an introduction. So I think the teaching, I'm wondering how that's changing as well. I'm kind of, for COVID, I didn't decide to teach too much through the Zoom platform. So I'm feeling as I start up my own with some young herbalists here in my area, we're doing the Hawthorne Botanical Gathering in June. And we did it last year for the first time. So it's like a bigger thing. And that's how the younger herbalists are thinking. They'd like, you know, or at least this particular one that I'm collaborating with, Brielle, is. And I welcome that. I wanted to be part of how the younger generation of herbalists is wanting to teach and how they're seeing things. So I wanted to stay in touch with that. So I'm honored that they're including me. At the same time, I get my chance to teach again, and it's different. And I'm not sure how it's different yet. We tend to judge ourselves a little harshly sometimes. So I may be in one of those modes comparing, but I always feel it's more that I'm the legs of the plants. And often once I start telling the stories, it's their story.
Mhm. Yeah, they start coming through for sure. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be more of a need and desire to connect with teachers like you in person or seeing something like this live with the advent of AI being so prolific. I'm in the education space, online teaching, and we have it advertised to us all the time. Create a new course with AI in minutes. And there are
Wow.
people literally creating courses with AI generated content, but you don't have the verified knowledge or the experience. Like you said, that's
Mhm.
very similar to a person coming to you, and I say, what's very different about Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, it's not a this for that herbalism. There's a place for
Right.
that, like first aid, and I'm not putting anyone down. This is just, it's matter of fact in a sense. There's first aid, and it's like, yeah, plantain works really good for this. Yarrow works really good for this. But especially when you're getting to the deeper level and deeper seated health and wellness issues, you've got to have that deeper understanding, the experience by a practitioner's side, listening and and sitting in on various consultations and lessons and hearing the many examples that I don't think that I think will make even more valuable your event, for example, or listening to something like this live, and it wasn't computer generated. Well,
Yeah, I know. It's very scary for me because technology as it is, I'm trying to keep as simple as possible.
yeah.
Even though my art form part of that, but even now that can all be generated, and you wonder if people will understand, that this was a without hearing the artist or hearing how anything was done.
We'll see, huh?
Yeah,
We'll see.
yeah.
Something I like to ask someone who's been in practice for quite some time also is, have you seen a change in the ailments that people are presenting, or patterns?
Well, I think what's interesting for me is who calls, who is meant, I've always felt is we're meant to connect somehow. So I do a pre-interview that's free on the phone that maybe is 15 to 20 minutes to see what they're focusing on. And then if I feel that I get a sense and I already start to feel the plants reaching out, then I will then ask them to schedule a formal appointment, with a fee. And so I feel like it's either what I'm supposed to be learning as well as, does that make sense? So it really is a reciprocal thing when you're working with a client. I feel I'm going to learn something and I need to stay open to that. I know I will learn something from this person, as well as I know that I have some skills in service to them, and also that the plants will be doing most of the heavy lifting. I just have to find how to coordinate this event for them to come together. So there are certain things that I probably wouldn't be able to help with, and when you're asking about these ailments. So in the beginning, there were a lot more of the trauma type things and emotional, locked in chronic emotional things of traumatic past that then I could utilize the flower essence skills in combination with making nourishing teas. So these people learned how to nourish themselves from them actually having to make their tea in a ritual way for themselves. And so even that is a big step often for people. Some people might come and just really expect to have a capsule or a tablet. No, that's not going to work for me. And I do sometimes work with some of those things for good purpose because there are good companies that make these things and I have access to them. But mostly it's going to be, my sessions are going to be teaching and listening about how that person is wanting to evolve their particular challenge using the plants. Um, so any illness that is described or diagnosed by a person that they come with is simply the foot in the door. After that, it just becomes not about that. quite often. I mean, you know what I mean, right? That has, maybe you can put words to it better than I, but I know that the story they've told themselves and over, or the diagnosis the doctor has given them is not always what we're going to be doing in the session.
Mhm.
And they soon learn that if they keep on the path.
Mhm. Have you seen patterns over the years of those certain diagnoses or what they think they're coming in with? You had mentioned trauma, and I mean, trauma has it could be many, many things as well. I'm curious
Hmm.
about, because we can study in economics, in history, in science, the when certain patterns came in, when certain aha moments came in, and or even like economics, they talk about how there are certain patterns that have happened over, they have cycles, right? And so I'm
Right.
curious, from an herbalist perspective, what have been those patterns? And if that's not your cup of tea, so to speak, or the way you see things, that's totally okay. I'm just, that's kind of curiosity.
No, I think, yeah, no, I think I'm kind of getting what you're getting at. So maybe one of the examples is like when Lyme became endemic, in our area, I haven't felt confident to be able to steer a person through, say, Stefan Brunner's type of protocol or anything. It's all too, I hardly know what to do for myself, but I can help them with what symptoms might be on the top of that particular concern. So we sit down and we have a conversation, and I give them on different resources and so forth. So that has been a big issue area. Um, and that can be anywhere where I may decide to use flower essences as only one part of where they have to go with some of their other research. So it's again more of the same of the teaching. How much do I know that I can contribute? How much do I tell them I don't know, that they will have to take responsibility themselves? Here are some resources. Here are some other herbalists you might want to get in touch with, get their point of view. If you
Yeah.
don't have the resources for yourself, how are you going to, I mean, again, there is also the idea that some people say, well, I can't afford that. And I go, okay, let's have that discussion, because that discussion right now is telling me something about what you can't give yourself. What's stopping that?
Mm.
You know, so it's more, again, sometimes we just really don't even address the issue. So I guess I have a hard time saying what the trend might be. Um, what
And
brings people in is not always what we end up doing, is what I have to say. Because if we stick to that, I have found sometimes then that's more like this is for this and this is for that. And they're coming in wanting that. And that isn't how it plays out. So I remember asking Evelyn, I said, if I'm not sick, this is very early on after my friend who I'd been bringing to her, she passed. And she passed at Evelyn's, actually, under Evelyn's care, which was her choice. So I asked Evelyn, I said, well, Evelyn, how can I learn from you? Do I have to be sick? Do I have to come with something like my friend that I'm bringing here? So that's how it started with Evelyn and myself, is realizing that this isn't about illness. This is about learning about our environment, our plants, our gardens, ourselves. And, you know, the illness might bring us to the door of an herbalist, but it's
I love
about
that.
a bigger world.
I appreciate that you didn't search to answer my question as it was, but searched for the underlying answer, which is true to what you're describing in a session, right? You're not addressing the diagnosis that's on the front. And it brought up a couple of things to mind where a person who's diagnosed with Lyme's, for example, there seems to be so many components, and they might be frustrated that they haven't been able to go to one practitioner to get all the solutions. And
Mhm.
seems to be so often for people as part of the journey, the journey is seeking out those stops along the way. You don't know what the next stop is, but you stop somewhere and then, they say, go over yonder, and that's another step of your journey. And so in a way, maybe it's even an odd sense of an odd kind of way of speaking some hope that even if you don't feel like you get all that you need from one practitioner, that's part of part of the journey.
Oh,
Uh,
beautifully said, Tara. And I think that can be a nice kernel of something that is about how natural healing has to be the responsibility of the individual in a way that we must encourage their seeking. And I feel always encouraging them is also an important component. So what we're talking about is, okay, I'm going to give them something in the session when they come. Definitely that's going to encourage the continuation process of, well, maybe I don't get it all from her, but I can always ask her what else, we can do. And so I don't have all the answers. I let people know I don't have all the answers, and I don't have all the answers all the time for myself. So I have to apply my seeking as a way to also help teach a client that might come that this is a good way to actually pursue one's health in the long run.
yeah,
And Evelyn always said, you have to change something about your lifestyle if you have an illness. So we always look at that too. Um, so if they're coming to the herbalist still with a mindset that we're just a doctor that is giving them something safer, I've heard that a lot, oh, just give me something safer. I want to take this medication over here. Then we have to explore this whole other thing. I'm not about to be irresponsible if someone needs pharmaceutical medication. That's not what I do.
mm,
So, you know, there is a way in which then that session ends up teaching them maybe about their medication and then what might be saved for making a tea for them. I still need them to leave with something that they've come because they've come to my door. Um, they need to take a plant away, certainly, because it's the plants that do the job of waking up. So I get off track a little bit. So you have to get me back on track. But
no problem. Well, there's so many directions we can go, and I think there's so many uncovered gems that were uncovered in the process. I'm sure much like a consultation for you. Maybe some closing thoughts on, you know, if you sometimes I say if you had a magic wand or if you could just help people see the light of herbalism, what is something that you wish everybody knew about the herbs?
that they can just go out their own door and it's out there. It's really out there on the ground. Just get down on the ground. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be able to live in the country where I can get on the ground. But if you're in the city, honestly, I've seen weeds just busting through the concrete, right? And you got trees and you've got things and seek them out. I think that's the place. And then start finding your teachers and start using places like you've created for community. Um, gather your friends in that are also green, weedy loving people.
Like
That's
that's
my magic wand that the world would be, much kinder for plants, pollinators, and people who love that kind of path, the meandering path, yeah, not the highway necessarily.
so you have your beautiful artwork. What how can people be in contact or find out more about you?
let's see. Well, I do have what is called a fixed website. It's www Jennifer, my name, dash Tucker.com, and that shows you the beautiful botanicals and other of my work. And that's how you can get in touch if you wanted any of that work. Myself, it's get in touch with me by
You don't have
my
to
email.
you don't have to give away any information you don't want to. I just
Right,
want to open up the door. Uh,
right, right. And right now, I don't have as much time as I did to see a lot of clients. But the door is always open for that because I need to continue to learn, to give, to serve, and to teach. And that that's what you've also offered me, Tara, which has been a beautiful hour spent with you to just kind of re-examine how much life does change, but how much we can continue to bring along what it is that that we that we need for our inspiration and our own love of life, which is health.
Indeed. And
Yeah.
we still want to learn from you more about poulticing. So I hope we can put that together in when it works out well for you.
Yeah, well, spring would be a good time. They're all fresh and we can blend them up and get a video going on how to do it. And then the fun thing won't be that we can actually just get all messy with the poultices on our bodies, but that's really the best way. I don't know how we do that on video because people will just it is more fun when we're sharing what it feels like right.
We'll have to figure out a way.
Yeah,
Maybe a
maybe.
trip to Pennsylvania is in our future.
Oh, wouldn't that be good? Please come out. Yes, that would be great.
It sounds like where you live is very, very beautiful. I live between the flatlands of the west of Minnesota and the kind of hilly river country, and so I can
Nice.
really appreciate the trees and the greenery and so
Yeah,
forth.
but you have a lot of diverse habitat,
We
and
do.
I have since, because of all my beautiful herbal teachers, have learned how amazing a green that I thought was just one sort of green is now really quite amazing and diverse. And yes, it's all family out there now. Green family.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's been a
So
pleasure.
thank you.
I look forward to the next
Thank
time.
you.
Talking, putting together a curriculum would be a blast as well, and wishing you the very best, of course, too, in your upcoming adventures.
Thank you. And you too.
Thank you.